All right, we'll go ahead and get started because I know we're probably going to run out of time. So I want to make sure that we're very sensitive to everybody's next 60 minutes. My name is Kristen Harper, and I'm a recovery specialist with C4 Innovations. And we are here today thanks to the Opioid Response Network, or STRTA program, which I'll explain in just a second. The topic today is impactful SUD interventions and recovery supports for youth and their families. We are thrilled to be able to offer this topic, especially with our young people coming out of 2020. And of course, some of the statistics and the data that we're seeing impacting mental health and substance use in our youth. We are really excited to chat with our panelists today. Please continue to introduce yourselves in the chat box. We'd love to find out who's here. Just to tell you a little bit about the Opioid Response Network, or ORN, otherwise known, provides local experienced consultants in prevention, treatment, and recovery in communities and organizations to help address the opioid crisis. The ORN accepts requests for education and training. So you can, at the end of the slideshow, you'll see a website where if you would like to request technical assistance and training, then there is a portal that you can submit a very brief form and be contacted by one of the ORN specialists to find out how we could help. Each state and territory has a designated team led by a regional technology transfer specialist, or a TTS, who's an expert in implementation of evidence-based practices, and they are lovely to work with. Additionally, SAMHSA, which I'm sure all of you know is the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration State Targeted Response Technical Assistance Grant, created the Opioid Response Network to assist STR grantees, individuals, and other organizations. But ORN has been opened up to anybody that is in need of any kind of technical assistance or training. It is also available to support the evidence-based prevention, treatment, and recovery of opioid use disorders. And I believe it's also been opened up thanks to the second round of opioid response funding to include stimulants as well. Here is the contact information. If you would like to reach out to ORN, please feel free to call the number, check it out on the website, or submit email requests to ORN through that portal. So the technical guidelines, just briefly, I'm going to try to do this in 30 seconds or less. You are on listen-only mode today. Audio is available through your computer speakers or by calling in, like I'm doing here. Live transcript is also available. So if you would like to have a closed caption option, check out the menu bar at the bottom of your computer. You can select that icon. You can either show subtitles, view a full transcript, or subtitle settings to make it a little more personal. You can also rename yourself if you would like to be known as first name and the company you work for, maybe, or even add your pronouns. Please feel free to do that within the participants icon at the bottom of your menu. And of course, the chat, which you've already found, because I've seen a ton of chats come in since we started. Please feel free to discuss any of the topics, questions throughout the conversation today with us, and we will make sure to save some time for the panelists to get to your questions. Thanks again for joining us for this really important conversation. As we settle in and get to know our panelists, continue to introduce yourselves in the chat box. So let's go to our panelists. I'm very excited to introduce these three. I've really enjoyed the conversations that we've had leading up to this particular webinar, and just have to say that you're in for a treat. So our first panelist, Thomas Guerra, is the founder and executive director of Miami Recovery Project. I met Thomas a couple of years ago through our collegiate recovery connections, but I'm excited for him to introduce himself in just a second and tell you a little bit about what he's working on now and his connection to this particular topic. We also have Alvaro Guevara, a licensed professional counselor who's also bilingual, and he works in Houston, Texas at the Center for Success and Independence. I've had the honor and privilege to work with a lot of his alumni through collegiate recovery and also recovery high school work, and they rave about the center. So I'm excited to hear about your work as well. And then, of course, we have my good friend, Laurie Quinn, who is all the way up in New York, but is doing work nationally through our Wellness Collector. She is a co-founder, and we'll also make sure to get you any information about our Wellness Collective and their peer support training specialists that has now gone virtual. So that's very exciting. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up to our panelists to just say hi and introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your connection to this topic. I'm going to ask Thomas to go first. Thomas.
Hello, everybody. My name's Thomas Guerra. I'm a person in long-term recovery. For me, that means I haven't had a drink or a drug since September 12th, 2014. And my connection to this topic is I am a former student in the collegiate recovery community. I'm the founder of Panthers for Recovery at Florida International University. So that was kind of my foot in the door into collegiate recovery and working with youth in recovery. Thanks.
Thanks, Thomas. I'm really glad that you were able to join us today. Alvaro, would you like to introduce yourself next, all the way over from Houston?
Yes, so I'm Alvaro Guevara. I'm a licensed professional counselor. I think as Kristen mentioned, the Center for Success and Independence is a residential treatment program. We work with clients from ages 12 to 17 with co-occurring disorders, mental health, substance use disorders primarily. We also have an intensive outpatient program that serves our community and our kids who are completing our program here. We also have a relapse prevention program here that adds about 4 or 5 hours of therapy a week to our clients who are struggling with substance use.
Thank you so much. We're going to dive into a couple of those different topics that you just brought up in just a second. So y'all hang on. Laurie, please go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little about your connection to this topic.
Sure. I am Laurie Quinn. I am in the Upper Hudson Valley of New York. So just to be very clear, when Kristen said New York, I'm in a very, very rural area. Think cows, lots and lots of cows. I am the mother of 2 adult sons in recovery from opioid use disorder. We're starting our 17th year as a family, navigating this chronic condition. So I left my world of tech and I became a certified addiction recovery coach in New York, co-founded our Wellness Collective where we offer training. And as Kristen mentioned, we have a brand new training that's offered online for recovery coaching. And we do a lot of speaking and curriculum development. And of course, I work primarily with families and offer them recovery coaching.
Thanks, Laurie. And I'm with you with the cows. I'm here in rural Georgia as well. So when you say Georgia, people immediately think Atlanta or Savannah. So we're definitely not in either one of those areas. So let's go ahead and jump into our topic today. And if we could go ahead and move to the next slide. I think the reason why this particular topic came about was not only because we were talking about treatment, especially around opioid use disorder treatment for adolescents and young adults. And the ages that we're talking about are about 12 to 24. And we're talking about adolescents at that 12 to 18. And then, of course, that bridge age of 18, 19 over to 24 as being the emergent adult population. And we were thinking, what are some really interesting strategies that communities across the country are using to really create these recovery ecosystems for their youth, young adults, and families? And this is a particular graphic that we developed while I was working in North Carolina that really kind of focuses in on various stages of the recovery process. So if you'll allow me briefly to kind of go through an explanation, I'm going to jump into some questions and discussion with our panelists and hope that you'll do the same in the chat. So that outer rim there, that's recovery initiation. And you'll see within the blue sphere on the outside, looks like a donut. You'll see things like naloxone interventions. You'll see inpatient treatment. You may see criminal justice in there. So where people are initiating their recovery, when our young people are initiating recovery, including schools, within the family ecosystem, within churches, this is where we need to bridge to other recovery supports that are going to help sustain their recovery, their longer term recovery, post treatment or post interaction with the criminal justice system or naloxone interaction. And so peer recovery coaches have really become an excellent navigator for all of these different phases. And I'm sure that our panelists will speak to that. We also have some really great best practices within the treatment realm that Alvaro will hopefully talk about when we talk about adolescent treatment and how he's also working with families and not just the young people individually. So the second phase here is that recovery maintenance piece. And the way that the literature describes this, the way communities are implementing it, is we're seeing things like recovery high schools, inclusion recovery programs, and recovery community centers or community recovery organizations that are popping up. Mutual aid support groups, those types of things are really helping to acclimate individuals back into society, back into daily living, either going to school or work or learning how to live back in their family systems again. That third most inner ring is called recovery actualization. And the way that the author of this concept described the theory is basically very similar to Maslow's social hierarchy. And so kind of that higher level of actualization means that we found our purpose. And as a woman in long-term recovery myself, I can say that going through an educational process and having additional recovery support services have enabled me to connect to a purpose and be able to give back to my community today as a citizen, as a mother, as a wife, as a daughter, and as a recovery professional. So I'm going to start chatting with our panelists because each of them represent not only one piece of these rings, but several. And I think that they've really learned how to navigate the seas, so to speak, of moving in and out of various resources. So my first question is actually, I'm going to go to Laurie first and ask you, Laurie, you know, as a mom, but also as a peer recovery specialist or a coach, how are you working with families, and what are some of the first questions, you know, or concerns or reaching out for help calls that you get when you're dealing with either, you know, mothers, fathers, or family members?
Sure. Typically, when I receive a call from a family member and it's the first time they're in crisis. And so my first concern is trying to assess the level of danger. Are they calling me because they've just encountered their worst case scenario? Is their loved one, you know, post overdose? Are they safe or not? And going through and asking some of those questions in a very calm and even tone, I can often hear, because typically it is a mom that calls me, you know, her start to breathe a little bit easier. And we go through the process and start to determine what actually her goal is in that moment, because the person calling me is the person I'm having the relationship with. So we go through and assess the level of harm that could be caused in the moment. I am a harm reductionist. I'm very, very active in the harm reduction community and in my own family. So then we start to talk about that. If we determine that the person is safe in the moment, what is the family done, or what are they aware of in regards to harm reduction and what they can do to avoid, you know, their worst case scenario as we do that. And it, you know, it varies, but it's basically the same thing, especially a loved one calling about someone. They're just so scared. And with that fear, of course, is usually the lack of understanding and education. So once we go through a lot of these things as we're talking, we then start to talk about what are the next steps? What are your goals? What do you want to do? They don't even understand very often the difference between detox and treatment. So you know, it's just establishing that relationship, which is what we do as recovery coaches. And it doesn't happen immediately. And I'm certainly not going to develop a recovery wellness plan with someone who's trying to breathe because they're, you know, they're in a very, very definite chaotic situation or crisis situation at the moment. So it's just starting that conversation, getting them to try to explore what their goals are and seeing how I can help them move forward.
And, you know, and I think that being a peer and getting those calls in the community, you know, having been through that process, both as being the child of a mother who was dealing with that and a sibling of a brother who, you know, at 15, 17 went into treatment, having the professionals to work with, so it's not all on the community, right, is critical. And I think that, you know, what Houston's been doing and a couple of the other communities around the country, Minneapolis is another one I think of, is really bridging those gaps, right, with peer coaches or with family members or professionals. Alvaro, I'd love to come to you and chat with you about your work at the center and find out, you know, how you're treating the adolescents, first of all. So what are some of the best practices, or, you know, what happens when a kid lands at your door? Kind of what does that process look like initially?
Well, again, since we're working in a residential setting, right, we're typically talking, again, some pretty extensive use, right? From marijuana to, opioids and Xanax, right? Things, benzos. And so typically what we're assessing like from our first phone call from a parent in our residential and our intensive outpatient program, and trying to determine again the duration of the use, the severity, and frequency. And then when they get here, we start to sort of figure out, because typically parents, at least from what we've seen, they typically only know about half of the use that the kids, and that's usually pretty good if they know about half. And so again, we're trying to determine which groups will kind of be best for them. We do a lot of like DBT stuff here, and we use DBT. There's skills for substance use in DBT when crisis is the addiction, and we start educating them about those strategies. We have some relapse prevention groups that we also put them in. Again, we're determining here, since we do mental health co-occurring and then just substance use primary, how significant is this, right? Again, severity, duration, frequency. Is it something that is significantly impacting their ability to complete their activities of daily living? And so again, if it is a kid, it's substance use primary co-occurring, it's definitely like a part of their life, then we put them in our relapse prevention program. They get additional groups on top of, emotion regulation strategies, their individual therapy. And then we're working with the family. And when we're working with the family, we're, trying to figure out for ways that they've been talking about substance use. Is it avoidant? Is it aggressive? Is it just very passive? Is the family struggling with addiction themselves? And just kind of start setting teaching strategies, teaching about validation, teaching, how to create those open lines of communication. And like, for example, typically my family sessions that I do with clients where substance use is a primary diagnosis. Just teaching the family how to like check in on urges is important. How to check in on and how to respond when their kid says that there's an urge or they did relapse, if these are the conversations they want their kid bringing to them, right? And usually parents are like, yeah, I do want to know. And so again, we try to create that. So they're doing the groups here. They got some specific relapse prevention groups too. They have their individual therapists. And then in our IOP program, same thing. We do family therapy, education. We have a parent support group also. And the parent support group is just the parents, no therapists. There's a moderator in there, and they just work on like talking about some of their struggles and their burnout. Sometimes they just need a place to talk about their burnout, dealing with their child's addiction.
I have so many questions for you. I have so many questions. I'm going to actually invite Thomas to come in here, though, before we come back to both you and Laurie. And Thomas, I'd love if you could just describe briefly your evolution through your recovery process. And I know, having started a collegiate recovery program, that makes me think, hey, you must have been in recovery either starting in school or out of school. Or can you talk to us a little bit about your personal experience as a young person getting into recovery and finding those recovery supports?
Sure. Well, of course, my substance use did start, in high school while I was in high school. And it led to me attempting college and university and not doing too good in that. But later on, as I had some more attempts at recovery, I decided to go back to school. And while in recovery, that's when I discovered, the need of collegiate recovery, particularly at my university that I was at, because it is 50,000 plus students, and there was no type of resources like that on our campus. And I found out the hard way, which was having a relapse while I was at the university, and having weeks here and there where I would try to get get it together and go. I went to reach out to the counseling office, and that's when they told me there was no recovery support services on campus. And that's what led my journey into collegiate recovery. And that, ultimately into what I'm doing today, working with a recovery community organization. But it really happened as a result of what happened to me, and realizing how many other students or young people that this is happening to. Where you should feel the safest on campus. It's not. Another thing that I didn't mention was, not that this is the reason for my relapse, but guess where I drank for the first time in over 3 years? It was on campus at the local Chili's on campus that was readily available, walking distance from my class. But when I was looking for recovery support services, that was nowhere to be found. So that's kind of what drove me to get into this and find, not only get into my recovery, but also use it as motivation to help other people like myself, specifically young people in recovery, because that's really where there's a lot to be done, and there's little services, but we definitely want to improve that and help the families as well.
Thanks, Thomas. And I have to ask, because I know my mom played such an integral role in my getting into recovery. And I'm just curious if you had a family member, or maybe even your mom too, that kind of helped sort of, I don't know, shepherd. I don't know if shepherd's the right word, but maybe sort of helped us navigate some of those really ugly days in the beginning.
Absolutely. I had to lean on my family for that. And it was very difficult for them, especially in the beginning when they had no knowledge of, what was going on with me. And there was really no conversation. Like many other families, there was no conversation about substance use, what it looked like or what to look out for. It was just, what I learned in school. So the first conversations were happening when I was going through it. And so my mom, didn't know what to do, but over time she learned, a little here and there from each time I was in treatment, and also seeking support for herself was really the key, when she was able to make some real changes and not take everything as hard. I mean, it's impossible to not take everything as hard, but she was able to support herself, because there's a lot of burnout in supporting somebody with substance use disorder. So to this day, she still continues doing her recovery, going to her specific meetings. She does celebrate recovery, and it's just as a result of what happened with me.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Laurie, I bet you could probably identify from the mother's perspective. I'd love to hear, how you have taken care of yourself, especially with two adult sons over the years. I'd love to just hear how you have taken care of yourself, and then also what you tell families as well as a peer.
Sure. I'll admit that I'm a work in progress, and I'm so touched by what Thomas just said. It's so similar to my experience, but being the mom, where I didn't know anything. And the fact that I didn't know anything, other than, we talked about alcohol and marijuana in our family. We had a history of alcoholism. So we talked about those things. I never thought I had to talk about opioids or heroin with them. So I didn't understand these things, and the fear of not only it being so scary, but also the fear because of the stigma kept me from talking about it outside the family. I had my own business. I went to people's homes to fix their computers. I was concerned they wouldn't let me because my sons were drug addicts. And that fear was easier for me than really doing the work to find out. And I identify as being in recovery myself from this, and we're talking now, we're in our 17th year. We had really some really good healthy years. And then last year, not a healthy year for either one, but they're both doing great right now. And I'm learning as I go. And it's why I do the work I do now. You know, I think that there's a similarity between me and a mom whose child has cancer or any other sort of chronic condition. You find yourselves loving that person, and the best way to support them is to go through and determine where your supports are. And yeah, we have to learn to take care of ourselves, which, like I said, I work on it. I'm not going to, I don't always practice what I preach, but I do understand the value of it. And the other thing that happens with me in my work is I have to be mindful of the fact that sometimes it triggers me. And it took me a while to realize that's what it was. I couldn't understand why I was feeling anxious and different things that were happening to me, and it scared me. And I finally got the help that I needed. And somebody said, well, you're being triggered. So let's talk about your strategy. So, you know, we're human. We're all human. And I'm just, you know, I'm so, you know, I'm proud of you, Thomas. This is the mom of me coming out that sees you doing what you're doing. I also grieve for the fact that neither of my children have done any additional education beyond high school. But if we'd had access to collegiate recovery, it would have been better. And Alvaro, I wish we had known you when we started back in 2009 with this, because it would have been so much easier on us as a family to be able to go to a professional and say, we need help. What do? We don't know what to do. So, you know, this conversation just illustrates that there's a definite ripple effect, which we all probably know, but that we have to use a multitude of services to determine and fit the needs of everyone.
Absolutely. And you just totally teed up my next question, which was absolutely for Alvaro. And I just, you know, you mentioned DBT earlier as a form of one of the tools that you use with adolescents that are in inpatient treatment down in Houston. I'm curious if you could tell us what DBT is and just a couple of other strategies that you see really working with the kiddos.
DBT, it stands for dialectical behavior therapy, and so it's a behavioral sort of intervention stuff. Again, it's very evidence based. Started out with borderline personality disorder and a couple other things, but some of the principles that are kind of in there that we use. We also use things from like the Matrix model and things like that that just kind of focus on relapse prevention and things. But some of I mean, I guess. Some of I have a few directions I go. So we do a multifamily group on Wednesdays for about an hour and a half with families. And what we do is we like educate the family about, you know, dialectics, right? Like what's the other person's truth? And it's really hard to sort of be judgmental of your teenager or think your teenager's like, you know, just effed up, if you will, right? Because, you know, they won't get their life on track. It's really hard to hold that kind of stance if you're trying to think genuinely like what's their truth, right? Because again, you know, if we can get past some of the basic reasons or just assumptions like, well, this is why they're relapsing, and you just try to come back to like dialectics and practice validation and figure out that kid's truth, that teenager's truth around their relapse and their drug use, and the difficulty in giving up peers who are using drugs that they've known since middle school. If you can get them to kind of like, if you can get the parent there, it just makes a big difference. So you know, there's multiple things, like there's emotion regulation strategies. We go over urge surfing strategies, like strategies, you know, it's even just educating urges don't last forever. You know, teens, sometimes I can be a little bit more crass and use examples like urges don't last forever. Like at some point you got to go number two, and you're not having an urge when you're going number two, right? And I know that's really silly, but it's just something that can kind of engage the teens and let them know, like, you know, you can make it through urges, like sooner or later something will come up. And, you know, I'm glad to see somebody said DBT was very impactful for them. But there's strategies that we go over, like how do I rebel possibly in a different way with a less destructive behavior? How do I build new bridges? How do I find out what's reinforcing my behavior in the community? How do I sort of like understand, you know, harm reduction and complete abstinence and find something in the middle, right? Like, you know, relapse happens. Okay, well, great. Well, you know, as a parent, you don't just want to take the position of just relapse happens. It's I mean, you understand it, but let's get back on the horse like as quickly as possible, right? And just reduce it and you know, take some of the benefits of focusing on abstinence, right? And kind of go from there, just kind of take the best from both camps to try to push them forward. So hopefully I somewhat answered the question, but there's a lot, like, again, dialectics, validation, the like I said, the alternate rebellion, adaptive denial, urge surfing, building new bridges, burning old bridges, you know, even just, you know, helping them understand, like, when you think about drugs, if you think about pizza at the same time, you know, make that thought about pizza compete with the urge for the drugs, right? And just keep playing around with these ideas and keep moving forward, and you know, understand your vulnerabilities. And those are things that we educate the parents too about, understanding the kids' vulnerabilities.
That's
So
great. I don't think I've ever had trouble thinking about pizza with any thought that I've had. So my next question is actually for all of you, and it's the importance that community plays, both with the young person and with their families. So how important is this idea of being connected to a group of peers, a community? I guess what I'm saying is, can we possibly recover in a vacuum? And just coming out of COVID, and actually I celebrated 20 years of abstinence-based recovery myself in March. And it just, on my actual anniversary, it just hit me that I had not actually been in person with my recovery community for a year because of the shutdown, because of 2020. And so I'm fascinated by this idea of, you know, how are we all adjusting, and how important is that idea of community and connection? And I'll open up to anybody that wants to go first.
I'll jump in. I think it's 150%, if not even more, needed. And I'll come and talk about it from a family perspective. For me, I co-founded an RCO in our area and started talking publicly about this. And what I got back was not the stigma, not that the fear I had never came true, where people were, you know, walking on the other side of the street when I came down it. But instead, I was enveloped in love and support in all my communities, professional and otherwise. And then people would say, you know, Laurie, I lost my son. You know, Laurie, my nephew. You know, Laurie, I've been in recovery. And, you know, I needed to be someone that opened up the room so we can have these conversations. And then, yes, you know, I've done my recovery it's been Al-Anon, it's been Nar-Anon, it's been my RCO. It progresses all the time. And now I'm immersed in the harm reduction community. And there are support meetings there that we go to. And I have one for families every week. And I can say personally, I need that. I need to hear from other people that they're feeling the same way I do. I need to hear that they have the same concerns or experience the same things. And then I need to hear hope. And it's just so amazing when we do come together like this to hear all of the great things that are happening. We all know there's bad things happening, and it's been overwhelmingly sad, but there are so many great things that are happening. So it's important. One of my sons came home last year after experiencing homelessness with his chaotic use. And so he's got about almost a year now that he's been on medication assisted treatment. And I can just see him at that point where he's getting a little itchy. And he has identified with me that when he's bored, I'm not going to go into what the definition of bored is for him, but that's how he says he can tell he's kind of feeling itchy and bored. And he met up with a friend from high school last night, and they played Frisbee golf. And boy, he just felt so much better and such a different person. And, you know, so we talked about the stages of change and where he is and what he's looking for, and tried to focus again on all the positives, but also talked about the fact that this is why you may be feeling the way you feel. It's okay. Hey, let's talk about our feelings. Let's normalize it. And that's the part for families that can be very hard. It's very hard for us to have those conversations sometimes.
Thank you, Laurie.
Yeah, I agree 100% that you know, connecting with other people like persons is definitely helpful. I mean, when I was actively using and drinking, guess what? I was hanging out with a lot of people that were drinking and using. I was not hanging out with that many people that were sober. And so likewise on this end, I definitely recommend to anybody that's new in recovery, especially young people, is to find that their niche with other young people, because it's difficult to be like the only person and trying to stay sober, especially in high school, especially in college. Right? So that's why it's so important to really have these recovery high schools and collegiate recovery programs, because that really changed my path. Once I started meeting people in recovery in college, it was just a whole new level of recovery, and it wasn't as hard to stay in recovery. It wasn't as hard to stay sober because just all my friends were in recovery doing the same thing. And so I didn't have to worry about where I was going or what I was doing because we were all together. And it continues that way, with RCO. And I'll tell you what, my best friends are in recovery that I met through collegiate recovery, and they're not only in recovery but they're thriving in recovery, and that rubs off. That motivates you, wants you to continue to do better, and you want your friends to do better as well. It's just I highly stress that this is like one of the most important things in recovery is to connect with other people, because you definitely don't want to be alone in this. And so the pandemic was very difficult on a lot of people. I'll tell you what, though, we connected through Zoom on a regular basis. We added more meetings, and we added like a midnight meeting. We did everything we could just so we could continue to connect. And I mean, it was in person, but it was a very good alternative. And it absolutely did help me through my recovery, and I know it helped a lot of people.
Thank you for that, Thomas. Yeah.
I think in Houston, I think this is where, I've heard we do pretty well as a city, for the teenagers, specifically, again, from ages 12 to 17, sometimes a little bit harder for the 12-year-olds. So in Houston here, we have like alternate peer groups. So essentially it is programs that are set up, and two of the bigger ones that I'm familiar with here in the Houston area is PDAP and TAFS. Teen and Family Services, and I think the Palmer Drug Abuse Program is what it's called, and they're linked to PDAP specifically is also linked to Archway Academy, which is a sober high school here in Houston. And so again, I think especially for your kids who are struggling with some pretty significant drug use, these end up becoming options, and a lot of times we wouldn't refer to them if we didn't notice that they really do benefit the teenagers. And so all three programs, there's another new program, I think, I haven't found out too many details about them, but I know they're out here, and they all have different, some of them are very structured, some a little bit less structured. Some of them provide some support in mental health, but just being able to connect to those peers, I think, and getting them away typically from their substance use peer using group ends up making a big difference. And just the emphasis on sobriety, and the school having teachers and counselors who are trained to look for these behaviors, relapses, give UAs, all that sort of stuff. It's just for our kids who have significant use, there's a path for them for sure. There's resources for them for sure if the parents and the kid are looking for it.
Thank you so much. And that actually leads me to my next question, but I'm going to hold on that one because we've got some really good ones that have come in the chat. Actually, all the questions are good. Please keep them coming. Let's talk a little bit about signs for parents or family members to look for with severe use or just kind of getting started in use. Alvaro, I kind of feel like I want to come to you first and then maybe go to Thomas and Laurie for their personal experience and of course working with other young people and other parents. But from a professional perspective, we know that there's a range, right, of use within the adolescent community. Can you tell us what should I freak out about as a parent, and what's something that's like, maybe look her out of it? How do we know?
Well, I think one of the things that we've talked to parents, or that parents have kind of talked to us about, like what they noticed. I mean, just because of the conversation we were having before, the peer group matters, right? The peer group of the kid matters. So if your son or daughter has a few friends that you are pretty sure that they're smoking marijuana, smell like marijuana, and all those sorts of things, I mean, you should be checking, right? I think sometimes too, some of the things like seeing money, I think like, I mean, I think pretty simple is just big shifts in behavior, right? Going from being very like outgoing to very like secretive, to telling you that they're anxious all the time, to now they're not so anxious, right? Like they found a way to manage their anxiety. Well, what's the coping skill? Well, like I just chill, like those sorts of things. Obviously, things in the room, wanting to, wear shirts with marijuana leaves, those are really obvious, right? But I mean, it's a little bit more difficult, I think, to find some stuff too, because vape pens are so easy to hide, and they can be kind of odorless, and you never know what's in the pods. So I think those are things to kind of look out for too, like have they started vaping, just being aware too of like the school, like somebody asked in the chat, like, with stepping up to like bigger drugs, usually the kids who go to like really like well-off schools with really well-off populations, like there's access to, pretty hard drugs there, right? And so just being aware too, like what's in my community, like, I don't know, if you call a counselor or principal, and find out about that. But I think, again, the big shifts in behaviors, I think, is probably the main thing to notice. A lot more secretiveness. I'm very wary, even for my own children, of Snapchat, because Snapchat it's very difficult to track what your kid's doing on Snapchat. Not to blame the app, I mean, it is, or anything like that. There was other apps that the teens used before that, but just even what apps they're using, the private chats, how immersed are they in that? I mean, those are like just some things to watch out for, I think. I hopefully answered the question.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. And I'm sure Laurie and Thomas could probably identify with some of the things you talked about. Do either one of you want to add on to that question?
Just real briefly, I think one of the biggest things for me, and I see in a lot of former clients, is the mental health issues. Is something that is a precursor, to, if they don't seek help for their mental health issues, guess what? They're more likely to use, because simply because it does work in the beginning. 100%. Anxiety, depression, whatever it may be. That was definitely the reason for that I adapted so well to using and drinking. Alvaro said, being secretive. I was 100% secretive. I would, bolt right to my room, try to have as little interaction as possible with my family. I went from, in my case, it was going out a lot more, being a lot more social. And those were the things that immediately happened with me. And my money that I had, I'm asking for a lot more money, or things are missing. And those are with things that happened pretty quickly with me. But those are some signs that could be looked for.
Thanks, Thomas. Laurie, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
It is what I saw the question come up at least once in the chat, and I wish there was a magic bullet answer. There isn't. It is exactly what we've discussed. You know your child better than anybody else. You need to notice when there are changes. Now, will those changes mean substance use, or will they be something else? It's very hard to tell with them, right? They're teenagers. I regret that when my 5-year-old was exhibiting symptoms of depression, I didn't follow through. I didn't know. I didn't understand mental health. I thought in order for him to be so, depressed, he couldn't get out of bed, and he was 5. He seemed fine. I wish I'd pursued it, because guess what he was diagnosed with when he started treatment and is on medication. My other one started middle school by taking his friend's Adderall. We suspect he's a low dopamine producer. Didn't know that then. So in our case, my oldest, I didn't know till the day he rolled up his sleeves, showed me his arms. I didn't know what track marks looked like. And in the emergency room, when he finally took off the 3 and 4 layers of clothes, I saw how thin he was. So I couldn't see it or wouldn't see it. That is another story. But it was harder with the opioids and the heroin because they didn't look sick. And then my youngest, when he was taking his friend's Adderall, the symptoms that we now realize we didn't give enough credit to was he wouldn't get up in the morning because he was up all night. He was taking stimulants, and we literally just thought he was being a difficult teenager. And instead of addressing what really could be wrong, we were pouring buckets of cold water on him in the morning and yelling at him. So that kind of killed communication in our family for a few years. So you really need to just be in touch with your child and speak to them. So one of the things I've done with my children in their recovery to help improve communication is say to them, for example, one continued to smoke marijuana for his anxiety. And in the harm reduction model, we're supportive. And he said, all right, so at what point would you identify smoking marijuana as becoming problematic for you? Not me, not what I thought. And he said, well, when I'm not able to I'm late for work, or I'm having trouble going to work, or I'm not seeing my friends, or financially. And you know what? In his own time, he started to see the change, and he ended up choosing to stop on his own. It wasn't parent mandated. There was no threats. So there's an open communication between us around that I'm very, very grateful for. So it's about communication, and don't wait till you're in crisis. Please have these conversations now, if possible, so that when you're in crisis, maybe you've already, gained some traction around learning about it.
Oh gosh, that's such a great point from both of you. Thank you. It makes me think of, starting off my career at, 7 years into abstinence-based recovery. I started a collegiate recovery program and working with, 18 to, I think the oldest student I had was like 58 years old. It's so much easier to do harm reduction with that population than when I moved into the recovery high school world. And I'm talking to a 14-year-old about their use. It was just like night and day, just a completely different conversation. So that's one of the things that I'm really curious about. And I'm not aware of anybody doing any research on harm reduction with adolescents. I'd love to learn more. If anybody's aware of it out there in the universe that's paying attention to this conversation, please send it to me. But yeah, so, how old was your son at the time when you had that amazing conversation and got to this beautiful place of unconditional love around harm reduction and marijuana use, when I'm talking to a 14-year-old that I may want to strangle because we don't know what's happening to their brain, right?
Right. And we know as adolescents, their brains aren't developed yet, right? So we've got that added layer of baloney going on in their brain, which is not an evidence-based technical term. That's a mom term. But right. So how do we do this? Well, this happened for me in the last few years. So my son was in his late 20s. So again, to reiterate, we've been doing this for at least 17 years. Change does not happen overnight, and relationships continuously change. So our relationship has improved. Our communication has improved. It doesn't mean we don't still have issues and we aren't still a work in progress. That's why I encourage you to start, as young as possible with this. And who doesn't want to have better communication with their kids, right? There are things out there, motivational interviewing. It's a big piece of the recovery coach training, and anyone who's clinical is familiar with it too. I use that with my children. I use it with my husband, for goodness sakes, and it's better. So, work on what you can around your communication. And if you are having some challenges because you have someone, it's very different. I understand when they're under the age of 18. And I think there's blessings and I think there's some negatives to that. But when you're doing that, you have the blessing that you can get them somewhere and mandate that they have to go and talk to somebody. But I just found in our family, it helped us really to do this as a family. I went through years of screaming and yelling and being mean and tough love. And I regret that so much now because I understand now the damage I caused to them and that they were hurting, but I didn't understand it at that point. So education is so, so important, and communication is just, the cherry on top.
Absolutely. Thank you, Laurie. And I saw some great resources posted in the chat to my call to action for adolescent harm reduction research. So thank you all so much for posting those. I can't wait to check them out. Thomas, I wanted to come back to you for a follow-up question in regards to your recovery and connecting it with education specifically. what has that added to your recovery experience? Has it helped you get connected to a purpose, or can you talk to us a little bit about why education and recovery being connected is so critical for us at times?
Right. Well, absolutely. I found my purpose while going back for my to pursue my higher education. Not necessarily in what I got my degree in, but I found I think the most important thing that I was able to get from going back to school was realizing that I can. When I had so many years of believing that I couldn't do things, based on my addiction telling me that I couldn't, you can't go back to school. You can't. It's too late. You lost all all the time you can. You're not as smart as you used to be. You can't do this. You can't do that. And I absolutely 100% believed all that. Until, I just kept on showing up and kept on showing up and, have relapses. And, once I was able to sustain a good amount of time in recovery, actually getting my associate's degree was like an amazing thing to me. It was amazing. Getting it, the 2-year degree, 13 years after I started it, and it didn't matter. It was 13 years later. It mattered that I did it, and it's exactly what got me to hey, I want a little bit more of this. I love this. I like this feeling. So going back to get my bachelor's degree and then my master's, and this is, I mean, whether it's going back to school or finding a purpose is really what it is. I don't think it's just specific to going back to school, but it's finding something that you thrive in. And I was able to do that by going back to school and seeing it from examples of other people. If there wasn't other people doing it, then I don't know if I would have tried it. And now I get to be the example for other people, and go share about. I was where you were. I didn't believe I could do any of that. And this is if you knew me a few years back, you wouldn't believe I'm the same person. And that's really when the that hope and that change begins. And I see it every day. With there's a buddy of mine that he's always taking selfies while he's on campus because he never thought he'd be in college. And that really makes my day when I see things like that. It's really just giving people the motivation, because that voice that tells you can't do it is always going to be there. It's always there. It's still here today. It's just that I have resources that help me get through that. There's that imposter syndrome that it's there. It's still there today, but I get through it and I continue to show up. Whereas that used to prevent me from even trying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you, Thomas. I can just so identify. It took me 7 years to get my undergraduate, and I got my master's in a year. And I'm a PhD dropout because statistics killed me. So I was like, I'm done when I got to statistics. But and also that experience, connecting education while also exploring a recovery pathway, that has been super helpful to me over the years. And then becoming a mother and looking at this idea of like generational addiction, right? And how are we breaking the cycle, or can we break the cycle? And I know that you're a father as well, Thomas. And as somebody in recovery, I just feel like any sort of opportunities for us to make deposits in our recovery capital, like an educational or a professional, or, doing an art class, I don't know, just anything that kind of adds to that capital, I feel like it's something that I'm also doing for my kids as well. I don't know if you can identify with that, but I don't know if we'll ever break a cycle, but that's something else I've always been curious about with addiction and intergenerational families.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I mean, I think the I'm able to have a unique experience that's going to help me that my parents didn't have in helping me. I'll be able to identify things quicker if it gets to that. And I start very young with it. My daughter's 7, my son is 5. They know Poppy's in recovery. Poppy has to go to these meetings. Poppy has to do all these things. I actually spoke in my daughter's class last week, and I talked about addiction and recovery. And they knew what addiction was. They knew what recovery was. So it's not like I was telling them something they didn't know. They know. And so it's just a little bit of breaking that stigma. And I showed them some pictures of people in recovery. I showed them Iron Man. I showed them Harry Potter. I showed them Stephanie and Uncle Jesse from Fuller House, right? And they recognize positive things through them. So I don't think there's, they understand. So that's young enough.
That's awesome. I'm going to use that with my kids for sure. I love that Iron Man. I forget it's a character, but he's actually in recovery in real life. Alvaro, I wanted to go over to you too. I know we've only got a couple minutes left, but this idea of the Houston recovery ecosystem for young people, I'm curious if there's one or two things that other communities need to have, like absolutely need to have, to be able to offer good support or effective support for their young people. Based off your experience in Houston, what are some of those kind of most basic services that communities need?
I really think that the APGs is really great. I mean, I think if people can build APGs in the communities, they go a long way. I mean, there's tons of kids that I haven't met, obviously, because I usually tell kids if they've met me, something's gone terribly wrong, right? I'm in your life because you made some tough choices, right? And so, but I feel like the APG just being that first level, that alternate peer group, right? Being that first level, I think is I guess if I was going to go into a brand new community and think of building something, that would be it. Because again, I think again, some people in the chat mentioned, like if you have a 14-year-old who wants to smoke and things like, you got to know how to like tackle it. You still have to set limits. Like there still has to be consequences, because you can't necessarily like not try to impede them from using drugs, right? Especially at that age. It's different with a 30-year-old. It's the choice, right? Like, and there's something different there. And then, but even like, the APGs, I think, know how to work with a 14-year-old versus a 17-year-old, because there's differences. There really is. Even 14 to 16, there's just a difference in the approach. And I think in how, even like in family therapy, how many consequences would be set up, right? And how much they would have to participate. So I think alternate peer groups, if I had to, start in a new community, that's probably what I would work on, because building that community overall, right? And getting them away from their substance use group and having professionals around who can help guide you for your kid's recovery from age 14 to 16 to 17, whatever it is, right? I think is just really helpful, and just kind of understanding those basic principles that I think I talked about a little bit earlier. Just really, again, like go, because there's a way to gently provide consequences, right? There's a way to gently say like, no, we're not on board with you smoking weed. Like you're 15, like stop, right? Or we're doing something else, right? And so again, yeah, I think I went on and on there, but the APG.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. The other component of the APG that I love so much is the family community too, right? So the alternative peer groups are not only focused on the kids or the teens, but there's meetings, there's support, community events for families, specifically parents too. So not only are the kids getting the benefit of the APGs, but the families do too. Yeah, I always said that was really cool. Yeah, so then they're both happening at almost like, parallel to each other.
And one of the APGs here has multifamily meetings also, where it's the teens and the families learning the skills together. And that's what we do in our multifamily. There has to be a place where they learn the skills together, especially when you're talking about like, again, how do I approach my kid relapsing or having thoughts about relapse in an effective manner?
Thank you so much for that. And we've had some really great discussion. I don't know if everybody's been able to keep up with it while we were chatting within our conversation today, but we have recorded the session, and if anybody would like to access it, it will be available through the ORN network. We'll go ahead and pop up that last slide for me, please, Melissa. Thank you so much. If you have any questions for our panelists today, if you'd like to follow up with any of the discussion, please feel free to reach out to us. Our next discussion, though, is going to be Wednesdays in June. It looks like we've got a June 30th and July 14th, and it's going to be parenting and recovery. Specifically, I think we're going to pull in the pregnant, postpartum, and having just given birth to a beautiful boy in December. I can tell you that this conversation is going to be excellent. I've already talked to a couple of the professionals that are part of the panel and am thrilled. So please feel free to join us again. And again, if you have any other questions about ORN or want to seek a request yourself, please feel free to reach out to us at orn.org through the website there. So thank you so much to all of our panelists. That was amazing. That was extremely helpful to me as a new parent. And I'm really glad that I know all of you, so I can call you when my daughter turns 12 or 14. I say, help, I need your help. But yeah, I hope everybody enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time. Everybody take care. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.